I'm sure by now you've seen the latest footage that has been dropped for Final Fantasy 16 from the various outlets and influencers, and understandably, you would be pretty excited. Me too. But I've always had a weird relationship with Final Fantasy, and it's always been a franchise that I couldn't really get into, whether that be due to the characters I don't necessarily enjoy, or the combat systems, or just really feeling the age of the games themselves. But as a non-fan of the Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy 16 has got me very excited to probably jump in to the franchise. Now, as mentioned before, my experience with Final Fantasy has been fairly lackluster, to say the least. I tried Final Fantasy 7, couldn't get into it. Tried the 7 remake, it was decent, but it never really held my attention. I watched a mate play Final Fantasy 10, and, well... yeah, I didn't really hang around for that one. But 16 truly excites me. It has captured my attention, and it's most likely going to be a day one purchase for me, and I'm here to explain why. So as someone who is an absolute outsider to the Final Fantasy franchise, there has always seemed to be an element of cringe regarding the dialogue. However, I can understand that to many, there would be a certain appeal to this. Similar to how Kingdom Hearts is abhorrently written, but there's somewhat of a charm to it. This game, at least from what I've seen and heard so far, seems to be delving well away from those tropes. In fact, and as per the video made by SkillUp, this Final Fantasy game feels like it's going to abandon a lot of what makes a traditional Final Fantasy game recognizable as a Final Fantasy game, in favor for a more contemporary approach to the franchise, and I gotta say, I love that. Clive, the main protagonist, seems to stand on his own in terms of the Final Fantasy leads, at least to someone who has never really played the franchise before. He's more stoic, independent, likable, and from someone who hasn't really been too fond of a lot of main characters within this franchise, he just seems so much more likable in that badass, mature kind of way. This game also takes that maturity from its lead and applies it to the entire story, giving us a game that shares allegories to our real world, not uncommon for Final Fantasy games, but done in a way that respects the player's age in presenting these mature themes, whereby it doesn't feel like any impact has been compromised in trying to keep a child-friendly rating. It truly feels like this will be the most brutal, mature, and unrelenting story told as an entry to this behemoth of a franchise. This game also has an extremely low barrier to entry, more so than most other Final Fantasy games. A lot of people know that you can pick up most Final Fantasy games, and because their stories are independent, you shouldn't have too many difficulties in trying to keep up with that particular story. But a lot of the complaints also come with the combat. The combat in this game has been changed to reflect more of a Devil May Cry or God of War real-time combat where you're constantly thinking on your feet, rather than feeling like the battle comes to a stop when implementing the traditional turn-based systems. This is one of the biggest issues for me with the older Final Fantasy games, and one of the reasons why I just really couldn't get into it. It's my personal preference for a game to not have a turn-based system. It can work when you're battling Pokemon and things like that, but when you're going up a giant monster and there's a huge cutscene where it's pushing you to the edge of a cliff or something like that, only to have all the players in your party stand in a static single file line waiting for their turn to be hit. It completely removes any and all suspense from me, and it just completely takes me out of the game. So this shift in combat is very welcome to me. It's also said to be very newbie friendly, which some might not like. There are supposedly two difficulty options, a basic action mode, which I assume would be the normal difficulty and division that the game is meant to be played in, and there's also a story mode, which gives you certain abilities and equipable accessories to make combat a lot easier so the player can focus more on the story elements being told. One of the main sentiments that's being reported back by these influencers and outlets is that the game is not really that difficult, so people might have an issue with that, especially the people who want a real challenge, but that might change at the game's release, we don't know, but for now there seems to be two difficulty options. There's also not as much party or team member management, which I love. It's said that you'll only be able to control Clive, and there's no way to direct or control the party members in combat. You can, however, command your papa, Torgal, to attack or heal, but if that is too much for you, or you just cannot be asked in doing that, there is an option to automate this in the menus so your focus can solely be on controlling Clive, engaging the combat, and absorbing as much of the story as possible. I absolutely love this because I felt in my short time playing 7, it felt more of a distraction for me to play as the other characters. They were cool and all, but a lot of the times I wanted just to play as Cloud. I also found that some of the characters fell behind in battle, so I was opting in to control them for their own protection rather than just me wanting to play as them. It was by necessity rather than feeling like it was a choice. Now moving back to 16's combat, you then throw in a bunch of what is known as icons that were summons from past Final Fantasy games. However, in this game, people can actually transform into their icons for these huge scale fights at peak power levels. There are also these icon palettes on the right hand side here, and each palette will have its own unique attacks. You can see the different palettes here, and they have 2 unique moves each. So if there's 3 there, you'll have 6 unique moves in total, all of which are tied to their respective palette. Mixing that with the melee combat and anything else that's in this game that you see through the footage here, and you've got yourself a pretty fucking awesome combat system. Changing the gameplay structure and lowering the barrier to entry for those like myself who haven't really done anything more than a simple dabble into the franchise, this really feels like it could be the biggest Final Fantasy game yet. It has the widest and broadest appeal. It seems like it's the most accessible for the range of reasons I listed in this video, and completely abandons the turn-based system which the Final Fantasy franchise has slowly been moving away from. And if you also ask younger gamers or gamers that just really aren't into turn-based systems, it's one of the biggest reasons why they don't get into Final Fantasy, despite not every Final Fantasy game having a turn-based combat system. Turn-based just isn't in anymore. It's time to move on, and I know I'm going to piss a lot of people off with that, but especially for the Final Fantasy franchise, it's time to move on from the turn-based system. Seeing that this game completely abandons it and it makes a big deal about it, I think is going to bring in so much appeal to this game. This game no longer feels dated by a preconceived notion of what a Final Fantasy game should be like. Rather, it feels like a Final Fantasy game that has stepped into modern times. A game from the looks of which almost any gamer from any skill level and background can enjoy. And that is why I am super excited about this game. But let me know your thoughts on the game in the comments below. Are you excited for it? Are you going to be buying it day one, or are you going to be waiting on the reviews? Let me know all your thoughts, and if you liked the video, please go ahead and leave it a like and sub to the channel. But that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.